problem for the Tory party is it really doesn't believe in anything. If the answer is well, what, Rwanda, same-sex toilets. I mean, what does that say about the once grand political force that dominated the 20th century? It really has run out of road, run out of track. But a lot of people, Tory MPs, who need to spend more time out in the country, less time talking to each other, less time on their WhatsApp group.
Today, delighted to be speaking to the historian and head teacher, Anthony Seldon. Good morning, Anthony.
Good morning.
And the journalist and crime novelist, Flic, Everett. Morning, Flic.
Hello.
Lots to get into in the next half an hour. We're going to be asking, is Rishi Sunak right that there could be a hung parliament? Would that be a bad thing? And with lots of new mayors taking up their posts, can they disrupt the UK's maybe tired political scene?
Now, Rishi Sunak has told The Times there could be a hung parliament at the next election. It's the first time he's conceded that there might not be a Conservative majority. Well, we heard from Ben Page, who runs the pollsters Ipsos, and he said the idea was for the birds. His surveys show a clear Labour win is most likely. Health Minister Marie Caulfield told us earlier that the problem for the Conservatives was that their backers stayed at home in the local elections.
If you look at the results of Blackpool South, for example, our voters, 13,000 of them that voted for us at the last election, stayed at home. So the overwhelming kind of sense that I certainly get on the doorstep is that people aren't moving towards Labour or the Lib Dems. They are either staying at home or coming out to vote for us. Come a general election, people will likely come out and vote. Turnout will be much higher. And so, yes, I do think there's every chance that we can win the next election, because voters aren't switching to Labour. They're just, in these set of elections, have decided to sit it out, the ones that would normally come out and vote for us.
That's the Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, there, speaking to us a bit earlier. Anthony, to start with you, what do you make of Rishi Sunak saying that we're on course to have a hung parliament? I mean, you know, on the one hand, that is an admission that the Tories won't win, but maybe that is the best case scenario for them.
Yeah, I think it's a really smart move by him. I mean, look, what else can he say? The results were marvellous. Obviously, he can't. And he's pinning his hopes, as the front page of the paper says today, on the splendidly named election expert Michael Thrasher. And Thrasher, his research suggests that actually a hung parliament might be possible, and who knows? And certainly the threat of a hung parliament is a clever move, because it will nudge those stay-at-home Tory voters to get out and get off to the booze and cast their vote in favour of the Tories, because they don't want to see a coalition, and they believe that maybe there is a point, and maybe it's not going to be a landslide. So I think it's clever psychology, clever politics, but also there's frankly no other thing that he could say. And pinning it on that piece of research by Thrasher is a smart move.
It's interesting, Flic, that actually we've had a number of people messaging this morning saying they would quite like a hung parliament.
Right. I don't think most of us would like a hung parliament. You know, when it's happened before, it hasn't led to anything very impressive. I think that it's wishful thinking, to be honest. And I agree with Anthony that, of course, what else can he say? Because it was an absolute thrashing at the local elections, somewhat disastrous, in fact, you would say. And I think that, of course, nobody wants a hung parliament who's in government currently. And this is their best case scenario. We're looking at the end of days, really. I also think that the research quoted this morning is quite flawed, because obviously it's based on local elections, and in general terms, the turnout and the voting pattern of a general election is very different. For instance, you know, it's completely ignored the threat of Labour in Scotland. Obviously, the SNP have romped to victory in the past, but I don't think that's going to happen in the next general election, because in the last YouGov study, apparently 1 in 3 Scots are thinking they'll now vote Labour, and Labour have a 2-point lead over the SNP as of April. That was not the case in previous elections, and I think the big disaster for Labour in past times has been the threat of the SNP, and with that now fading, amongst their own disaster. I think that the Tories will be lucky to have many seats at all, let alone a hung parliament, the way it's going.
I mean, that's what Suella Braverman was saying yesterday. And you're right, Flic, to talk about the issues with this specific piece of an election analysis. It is based basically on what happened in the local elections, if that was then translated across the UK and doesn't mention Scotland. Anthony, the Prime Minister has sort of cherry-picked the least worst set of election predictions of what might happen. And it's an interesting gamble for him almost to play, because by saying we're heading for a hung parliament, he is admitting for the first time that the Conservatives are on course to lose.
He is, and that's a brave but a realistic decision. Look, history suggests very clearly, and I'm a historian, I think history is a really good, strong predictor of the future. It says that you can't do much coming in this late in a period of one-party domination. It also says that since 1832, no party has ever won 5 general elections on the trot, which is what this would be. So, from every point of view, from the point of view of polling in these locals, what the opinion polls are saying, what history says, he's not going to win, and therefore being realistic about it, I think, is a good, realistic move from him. Again, what else can he say? And I think that the Tory party are just full of notions about impossible things that can happen. The problem for the Tory party is it really doesn't believe in anything. If the answer is well, what, Rwanda, same-sex toilets. I mean, what does that say about the once grand political force that dominated the 20th century? It really has run out of road, run out of track. But a lot of people, Tory MPs, who need to spend more time out in the country, less time talking to each other, less time on their WhatsApp groups, less time in their ERG and other meetings, and actually smelling the weather out there and having a heavy dose of realism. I mean, they are not going to win, period.
I mean, Flic, it's a really interesting point about which direction the Conservatives turn now, if indeed they turn in any direction. Maybe they continue with the current strategy. You've got Suella Braverman suggesting they need to move further to the right. You had Andy Street in his very gracious concession speech on Saturday evening saying the Conservative Party needs to return to the centre ground. I mean, should they change position, or is it too late in the day, and have the public just stop listening?
Well, I think one of the issues that we've forgotten all about is that a government is supposed to serve the people, not its own electoral chances. All of the rhetoric that we hear now is about how the Conservatives can stay in power. It's never about what the Conservatives are actually doing for the voters. And I think that that is one of the major ways they've gone wrong. They've become completely internalized. All they do, as Anthony says, is discuss things in their WhatsApp groups about each other and how they can retain power. They have run out of ideas, and they have run out of fundamental decency. You know, a lot of people have been absolutely horrified by the Rwanda plans. I think the idea that swinging even further to the right would be a vote winner is completely deranged, actually. And I think most people would agree with that. Britain is not fundamentally a very right-wing country. There are some very loud-mouthed factions who are very right-wing, but that doesn't mean they are the people who will be voting for the next government. And I think that to go further right will be an absolute vote loser. I think that the general feeling is that Britain is quite a centrist country, and to do anything other than appeal to that centre ground and possibly a further left is an act of political suicide. So if they do that, they really won't get any seats, in my opinion.
And Flic is, of course, absolutely right. The Tory party only ever wins as a centre party. It never wins from the right. It can become right, as it did under Margaret Thatcher, but there were very special circumstances in the 1980s. The Tory party, throughout history, has been a centrist party, and there's a lot of blaming of other people. Suella Braverman, in contrast to Andy Street, I mean, what a microcosm that gives you of the Tory party. One decent, honest, not blaming other people, the other fantasy blaming, and these are the people also who are responsible for Brexit. And if all they can say about Brexit is that it's failed, we can all see it's failed, but it's failed because it hasn't been carried out properly. Well, goodness gracious me.
Well, should we look at what Suella Braverman said? She said the Conservatives will be lucky to have any MPs left after the next election unless the Prime Minister cuts taxes, caps legal migration and pulls Britain out of the European Convention on Human Rights. It sounds like that would not get a vote of confidence from either of you two. Lots of you getting in touch, actually, on about whether a hung parliament may be a sensible threat or not. Kevin in Birmingham morning says, again, the threat of a hung parliament might encourage people to vote Labour to ensure there isn't one.
Anthony,
Well,
I just wanted to ask you about Rishi Sunak, because obviously you are a great chronicler of the life and times of prime ministers. Clearly, his time in Downing Street is not over, but most people expect him to be leaving office after the next election. As things stand, how do you think history will judge him?
well, I think a lot depends on what he does now, and if he goes down the dignified and the street kind of route and is measured and brings the party back into the centre, or if he goes down the blaming everybody else but us. I mean, look, they've been in power for 14 years. It has not been a successful period of Tory rule. All he can do is show the kind of dignity that the much blamed at the time John Major did. And but John Major was fighting a much shrewder, more charismatic leader in Tony Blair, or Harold Wilson, the last time the Tory party was fighting a tail-end campaign in 63, 64. I mean, Keir Starmer is neither Harold Wilson nor Tony Blair. There are things that can be done. He's not offering what the country yearns for, which is a vision, something that they can believe in, someone they can believe in. So there are things that he can do, but he will not do it, as Flic is saying. It's not just Flic and I don't think that that is the right thing. It's the country that doesn't think that's the right way to go. So dignity, a sense, as Flic was saying, it's not about tribalism. It's what the country does. The Prime Minister is the head of government, the head of government for the whole nation, not for his own tribe. I think the more that he can go down the Jeremy Hunt path, and there are some good centrist, sensible people there, and leave the hotheads to get the headlines, but actually get on with governing.
Should we talk about some other potential hotheads? The mayoral races on Thursday had some of the best news for the Conservatives on a very tough day, but also some of the worst. Ben Houchen held on in Tees Valley. Andy Street lost in the West Midlands. And in today's Times, Trevor Phillips makes the argument that mayors are actually the political disruptors that we need. He said we need more diversity of leadership in what is quite a sleepy public realm. Flic, is he right? Can they sort of inject this boost of sort of vigour and enthusiasm?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that's already been proven. You know, I'm originally from Manchester. I've lived there for most of my life. And I think, you know, the absolute groundswell of support for Andy Burnham is proof that when you get a good mayor who genuinely cares about the city that he's serving, or the area that, or she, obviously, the area that they're serving, I think that it's a wonderful thing. And it does take the power away from Westminster. And it does mean that somebody who understands the local concerns and local problems and issues is there on the ground and with the power to do something about it, well, budget allowing. But, you know, Andy Burnham has been a huge success in Manchester, and I think a lot of places would love to emulate that.
I mean, Anthony, isn't part of the problem there is a huge discrepancy in the powers that some of these leaders have. So if you look at the Mayor of London, he has, you know, control of the Metropolitan Police as well. He oversees Metropolitan Police. He has relatively quite a large amount of powers. Some of the other metro mayors, as they're called, really don't have that much power. Does that need to be evened out?
Well, I think it does. And as Trevor Phillips was saying in his really excellent article this morning, there could have been more power given to the London mayor still. So, yes, Flic and I seem to be agreeing on everything so far. Of course, we need local representation. I mean, a democracy is both about the centre, but it's also about the elements. And we need more differentiation in the country. It's far too centrally controlled. That means that vast swathes of the country feel alienated from London and the southeast. So I personally would have mayors in with real power, and if they compete against the central government, so much the better. I hoped and tried to get one in Brighton some years back, but the local politicians realised that would mean their own power being depleted, so they didn't want that. But I think this is a really good thing for democracy. We need to rejuvenate democracy. I'm a teacher, as you said. We need our young people to feel involved with it, and they don't in large numbers at the moment. Look at the very low turnout. So I think passionate local leaders addressing local issues is one of several ways to rejuvenate our democracy, which is vital.
But does that local leader, Flic, have to be in the shape of a mayor? I mean, I think truthfully, lots of people are a bit confused, even over the local elections, thinking, hang on, which politician is actually responsible for what in my local area?
Yeah, I think that's true, but that's down to a lack of information and communication rather than the fault of the mayors. And I think that, when somebody is doing a good job, it's very obvious what they're doing and how they're changing things. For instance, Andy Burnham's campaign to put the buses back in public ownership and cap the fares at £2, I think has been a huge success. So I think it comes down to explaining to people exactly what they will get from a local mayor, what they can offer. And I was looking actually at what mayors do. And it is very complicated. It's very complex. It's very different in different areas. Depends on budget and the makeup of the council and so on. So I think that there needs to be a much better campaign of information, if you like, about what a mayor can offer the local area so that people do understand what's feasible for them.
But surely, Anthony, it also comes down to the quality of individual who puts themselves forward. Now, people from across the political spectrum would say, for example, Andy Street, with his background in business, running John Lewis, was a very impressive individual. Questions have been raised in recent days, rightly or wrongly, about whether Susan Hall, for instance, was the strongest candidate the Conservatives could have put forward. Doesn't it really come down to the calibre of the individual?
Well, of course it does. But the more power that we give our elected officers, the more high quality people. I mean, look again back to school. Many people want to get involved in politics, but they see how little effective power MPs have. They see the trashing, the appalling treatment of MPs across the political spectrum, resulting even in the murders that we've seen of MPs, that they don't feel that they want to be part of that ugly, powerless competition. So I think we need to re-dignify the political realm, and we need to draw in. I think we need better people coming into public service in general, and politics in particular. Look, I don't care what political party, as long as it's a democratic, respectful party, people join. But I do think we need to get them in, and then we'll get more Burnhams and Streets.